In this video, I am going to talk you through 3 questions that I always get asked as a copywriter for service providers and coaches. So as a service business, particularly a one-on-one service provider, like a coach, a nutritionist, all the as a copywriter, all the kind of services where you are speaking directly to your clients, where you are almost the kind of brand in itself. It's just you. You might have a team behind you, but if you are providing that service one-on-one to your client, these are the questions that I get asked about brand voice, because it's very different to creating a brand voice for a company, for example. So I have written down 3 questions that I always get asked, so I'm going to refer to my notes. And please feel free to ask any other questions in the comments. I would love to answer them. So the first question I always get asked by my clients when we're kind of talking about brand voice is that they feel like when they talk to clients, when they're one-on-one with clients, when they're on a Zoom, when they're on the phone, when they're providing the service to clients, they're warm, they speak exactly how they would in normal life, they come across really well. But then as soon as they start to write, things go very formal, and they kind of lose that personality that they have when they speak because they're writing things down. So how do you get around that is the question. So first of all, let's talk about the reason why that happens, which is more likely than not because of the way you were taught to write at school. So we have it drilled into us from a very young age to write in an academic way, to write in a certain way. And that's how we're taught to write. So of course, then when we become business owners and we're marketing ourselves and we suddenly are asked to write with our personality, to write with without the grammatical rules that we were probably taught at school, suddenly it's very, very difficult. Of course it is, because no one teaches you how to write like that. So that's the problem. That is why suddenly you become very academic and stiff when you write, when that doesn't happen when you talk, because you were never, taught to talk like that. So what I would always say is you don't have to conform to the grammar rules that you were taught in English. You can start sentences with because. You can start sentences with and, because in real life you do. You can make sentences shorter than you normally would in academic writing, a lot shorter in fact. You can change the rhythm, so you might have a really short, even 3-word sentence followed by a longer sentence. That doesn't matter. You can even put full stops after each word if you really want to kind of emphasize stuff. So you can have more fun than when you were writing at school, definitely. What I would always say is whatever you write down, read it out loud. Read everything out loud, because that is going to make you realize how you speak. So as you read the words you've written, you're going to I wouldn't use that word, or I would stop speaking here and start a new sentence, whereas in my writing, I've carried it on. So reading everything out loud will really help. And the more you do that, the more you practice, the more you will start to write in the way that you speak. It'll translate a little bit easier. It's just one of those things you have to just keep practicing. Brand voice is very difficult because it's not necessarily something you can learn. It's more just the more you do it, the more you write, the more confident you become, and the easier it will be to write like you speak. So my top tip there is to understand that academic writing, you can throw the rule book out the window a little bit. You don't have to write like academic, you can write very differently, and also read everything that you've written out loud. So that's the first question. How can you make your writing sound less formal? The second question that I always get asked is, should my brand voice sound like me or my target audience? So should I be writing, thinking of the kind of the words of the target audience or myself? So this one's a little bit more confusing in terms of how we could answer. So as a service provider, if you are directly in contact with your clients, so if you speak to your clients, if you provide your service one-on-one to them, it is always going to be more authentic if your voice in writing sounds more like your voice when you're talking to them. So if you're quite direct, if you're quite kind of straight to the point in your day-to-day kind of service and business, then let's reflect that in your writing, because otherwise it's going to become very inauthentic. The worst thing you can do, and I've seen this happen, is for people to come up with a brand voice that sounds really cool. And then when they actually kind of speak, it's very different, and it just does not translate well. So your brand voice should sound more like you than your target audience. However, what you do really need to be careful of is that you do not use jargon that your target audience wouldn't understand, words they don't understand. So yes, your brand voice needs to sound like you. So if you use a lot of exclamation and intonation when you talk, put your exclamation marks in your writing. If you are quite a kind of short, sharp, to the point, use lots of full stop. So really making sure your brand voice sounds like you, but also being really mindful of how your target audience might word things. So would they use this word? Would they understand this word? And weaving in those words that they use as well. And the way to do that is by doing voice of customer research, which I talk about a lot. And I'll share a link to a video where I talk about how to do voice of customer research. So it's really a mixture of the two. Always make your brand voice sound more like you than trying to sound like someone else, of course, especially if you're a one-on-one service provider. That's not necessarily true of a big brand or a business where there is no face of the business. Then you can have a bit of a different voice. But for you as a coach, as a service provider, let's make sure your voice sounds like you when you write. But also really be mindful of words that your target audience might not understand and might not use, and making sure you're using the words that they would use as well. So that's a tricky one, but again, it's something that will kind of come with practice and more with the writing side. So the third question that I always get asked when I'm talking about brand voice is, how do I get my brand voice across to a copywriter? So it might come to the point in your business where you decide you want to start outsourcing your copy, or maybe it's just one piece that you don't want to write yourself. Whatever that looks like, the scariest thing for a one-on-one service provider where your face and your voice is your brand is to relinquish control and hand that over and kind of say, okay, make this sound like me. Like, it seems like an impossible task, and that is why so many business owners cling on to it and kind of end up doing work that takes them hours and hours and away from work that's going to make them money, because they end up writing when they could be handing it over because they're scared that a copywriter won't get their brand voice right. It is tricky. It is, of course, tricky. My top tips here are always, when you're speaking to a copywriter, really the copywriter should be asking you the questions that gets the brand voice right. So don't let that hold you back. Don't feel like you need to know how to brief it into a copywriter before you work with one. Actually, a good copywriter will know how to coax it out of you. So always go to them. You don't have to have all the answers ready. You don't have to have like a brand voice written out in a kind of strategy doc or anything like that. A good copywriter will ask you the right questions. So remember that, first of all. It will help to have a few pieces of content that maybe you've written in the past, or even that you like from a different brand or a different person. Round those up and kind of say, this is the style I like, or I wrote this blog once, or I wrote this Instagram post once, and I really think this nails my voice. It really got it right. Share that with your copywriter. Hopefully they will ask for that anyway, but that's something you can have prepared if you are going to outsource to a copywriter. The other thing is a good copywriter who is trying to understand your brand voice will want to get on a call with you. They will want to hear how you speak. So when I start copywriting projects, I always have a strategy call with my clients for it. I'll have already spoken to them beforehand in order to get to that point where we're actually working together. But I will always have a 90-minute, 60-minute strategy call, first of all, just to, part of it is asking questions about target audience and that kind of thing, but also I'm listening to how you would say things, and I'm kind of picking up your brand voice that way as well, and that's a kind of, a skill that a copywriter has. So if a copywriter does not want to speak to you, if they're asking for everything in like kind of you to write everything down for them, that's a bit of a red flag, because they don't know how you speak then. Even they may ask you to send them videos, I don't know, but yeah, always try. A good copywriter will always want to speak to you, either on Zoom or a phone or a person, however that works. The other thing a good copywriter will do is to ask you, like I said, ask you loads of questions about how you want to come across. So there's lots of different ways that a brand voice can be kind of formulated. You could want to sound like a mentor, like a colleague, like a friend. There's lots of different kind of nuances to brand voice. So a good copywriter will ask you all those questions. But the main thing I want you to remember about that question, about how to get your brand voice over to a copywriter, is it's not up to you to have the answer to that. It's up to the copywriter to get that out from you. So I don't want that to be what holds you back, because I don't want you to kind of think, oh, okay, I don't have a brand voice defined, I'm never going to be able to work with a copywriter until that happens. That's not the case. A copywriter will help you to understand how to brief the brand voice into them. So, bit of a long one today, but those are my 3 top questions I always get asked when we're talking about brand voice. So the first one is, how come when I'm talking I sound great and personable and my personality comes across, and when I talk it becomes very formal? So we've covered that one. Read everything out loud. You don't have to write like you're writing an essay in English class anymore. The second question that I always get asked was around whether your brand voice should sound like you or your target audience. The answer to that is, if you are in direct contact with your client, your brand voice should sound like you, but leave the jargon. Make sure you know what your target audience, how they would phrase things, how would they ask things, what would they describe your service as. For example, a lot of my target audience don't necessarily use the word copywriter. My target audience is maybe kind of a little bit more marketing savvy, so they might know the term copywriter as compared to content writer, but I need to be mindful of that not everybody knows that term. So that's something I might reflect in my copy. And the third question that I always get asked is around the idea of how to outsource to a copywriter, how to make a copywriter sound like you when they're a totally different person. And my advice there is, let them do the work. So yes, round up some content that you think nails it. If you have it, if you don't, go to the copywriter and make sure they are asking the right questions to you. So they should be wanting to speak to you. They should be asking how you want to come across. They should be asking you to show them some pieces of content you really like. So make sure that if they're not asking those questions or asking to speak to you, that could be a red flag. Okay, so yes, like I said, a bit of a long one today, but I really want to share those questions with you. And look out for some more Q&A videos, which I'm going to be doing over the coming weeks.